Welcome to the Value Stuff Podcast. I am your host, Dan Glazier. I am a personal property appraiser and I value stuff for a living. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and share this podcast so we can keep it growing. So today I want to talk about a topic that I've had this in my mind for several years actually, even long before I started this podcast, and it is how do we deal with family when we are dealing with an estate? And this is mostly if you're an executor, but also if you're just part of the family and you're maybe one of the beneficiaries. But how do you deal with family? Because dealing with an estate is more difficult. Dealing with family is difficult. You put the two together, and wow, it's like putting dynamite and nitroglycerin together sometimes. I've put a lot of thought into this. Completed and I've dealt with thousands of estates, but actually an official appraisal reports, I've done well over 500, and it's like probably 80% of my business. And I really pay attention. And probably what breaks my heart the most is in some cases, in quite a few cases, I see families torn apart. And, you sit there and think, why? Like you see all these beautiful, you're in a house and you can tell there's lots of beautiful memories and photos, and you see the dining room table where everyone had Sunday dinner, and you see all these memories, and then it almost doesn't make sense. Like why are people not getting along? And as I'm a bit older now, I'm 56 years old, I kind of look at this like, okay, when you're dealing with an estate, families are forced together. And I know that's a strong word, forced. And then after the funeral and everyone's sad, everyone's grieving, now you have to figure out how we're going to wind down the estate, how we're going to manage the estate. Hopefully there's a will and there's an executor and they're in charge of it, but family has a say, like family always has a say. I've put a lot of thought into this, and I don't always understand it. I kind of do, I kind of don't. But when we get around, like all of us, when we get around our family, we all seem to regress into sort of people and personalities that we used to be. Like, I don't know. I think a lot of people, when you start getting in your later stages in your life, past 30, 40, 50, we tend to realize, okay, let's work on some of our weaknesses. Let's work on our emotional side of our intelligence. But when we get around family, it's kind of, I think family looks at you like the person maybe you were 20, 30, 40 years ago, and you kind of revert back to that. I don't know the science behind it, but it's definitely important. And I'd love to, if anyone wants to put that in the comments, like why that is. But I'm sure there's podcasts and scientists out there that can explain what part of the brain that happens with. But moving on, I just want to talk about, I actually got a funny story about that. I do have a funny story about that, about how when I started noticing this. So I remember my grandma got a new car. So this would have been the 80s. So this, I'm dating myself. And my grandma it was a Chevette. It was a Chevy Chevette, not a vet, but a Chevette, a little four-cylinder little car with a little hatchback. And she was so happy and so proud. And she's telling my aunt. And but it was a bit of a boast to my aunt, like, look, I've got this new car. And then my aunt's going, well, my car is a six-cylinder and it's faster and safer and better on gas. Or not better on gas, but faster and safer. Then my grandma was like, oh, mine's better on gas. But it was so funny. It was like two 10 and 12-year-olds, siblings going back and forth. And I kind of realized even years and years and years ago how we revert back. And that's just sort of a family dynamic, like how we do that. So that being said, let's get back to like difficult dealing with family and dealing with an estate. So there's several factors. Like one of them I already mentioned, like families are forced together. And in a lot of instances, we might not have seen any of these family members for weeks, months, years. Sometimes it's because they moved away. Sometimes they live in different provinces, states, different countries, different continents. Or sometimes it's things just, there's something didn't work out and we decide to go our own ways or we grew apart. It doesn't matter. But when you're dealing with an estate and family, you're forced together. And a lot changes in a lot of those years and times we've been apart. So that's a factor there. And then when you think about families and family dynamics, you have all your, you have your relatives, like your siblings, and your uncles, your aunts, and they all have different personalities. Some are more easier going than other, but it's also, spouses are there, get involved. And now not just spouses, and now sometimes there's children and grandchildren, and there's all these opinions on what to do with the estate. And we have to be honest here too. When you're dealing with an estate, you're usually dealing with some form of inheritance, but you're dealing with money. And we all know, let's just we're dealing with grieving and high emotions, and now we're dealing with money. And those are two things that can really change people's personalities in the short term anyways. So we have to remember that. And when we're talking about money, another factor to consider is not everybody's in the same financial situation. Some people, that inheritance, are like, okay, when am I getting my inheritance? When am I getting my inheritance? When am I getting my inheritance? And other people, they've done well or got lucky or worked hard. Doesn't matter. I don't know the reasons. I'm not here to judge. This podcast isn't about judging people. It's just about just laying it out. And so that's a big factor, like different financial situation. Wow. So you got money, people grieving, you got families together that haven't spoken in sometimes in years, and now you're forced to get together, and all the different personalities. And another thing we can't ignore in this day and age is politics. I go to the dog park and people want to talk politics. It's just like everywhere's politics, politics, politics. I was brought up like, don't talk politics, religion, certain things. And I don't know, people seem to bring those up. But when you're dealing with your family and you're dealing with an estate and you're dealing with an inheritance and you're dealing with how are we going to divide all this stuff up? I think let's leave the politics behind at this point. Once things settle down, maybe you can talk about politics, but let's just put politics aside because it can really fuel on the fire. There's all these cliches. So what do we do now that you're dealing with this estate, you're dealing with all these emotions, you're dealing with all this family, and you still have to, there's still a task in hand of having to manage an estate and how to decide what are we going to do with all this stuff, and what are all the tasks we have to do, and it can be very encumbersome. So I've kind of come up with 5 ways to deal with this, and this is just, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not, a psychologist, I'm not, I don't work for the government. This is just an observation from me, and of 5 ways I think you can handle this, which will help you out, help your family out when you're dealing with this situation. So number one, when you are dealing with an estate and you're dealing with family and you're dealing with all these different personalities, I think you have to approach all situations with empathy, and all, not just all situations, all interactions and situations with empathy. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you go back to people are in different financial situations, a lot of people grieve differently. Some people, maybe the person that passed on could be a parent, or could be a sibling, but some, maybe they're just having a really really hard time with this. And sometimes people express their emotions in different ways. Like some people can be very angry, and I think if you can kind of look at it with some empathy and say, okay, step back, especially very hard, very easily said than done, especially when you're dealing with family. And I go back to reverting back to how we used to be, but I think you have to tap into, okay, maybe they're just grieving, maybe they're just very sad, maybe their own personal life isn't doing that well at this point in their life, and this all coming together is a lot for them to take. So I think if we approach with everything with empathy, and you try and look at maybe how the other person is perceiving what's going on and how the estate's being handled and all this stuff, because there's a lot of moving pieces when you're dealing with an estate. Number two, and number two is, kind of like number one, where, not just empathy, but I think it's very important that there's a lot of communication and you also listen. And what do I mean by communication? So There's a lot of moving parts when you are dealing with an estate. There's dealing with banks, there's dealing with, you're dealing with the government, you're dealing with all the other family members, you're dealing with, well, there's wishes, there's things to be that were in the will that you have to deal with. There's just a lot coming at you, and you can get very overwhelmed and just like whatever, kind of shut it off. But I think you'll save a lot of hassles, a lot of family like arguing thing if you just listen. And I'll give you an example. There's sometimes when you're dealing, the hardest part of dealing with an estate, I'll say this, it's not just because I'm an appraiser, it's dealing with all the stuff, all the contents, all the household stuff, all the stuff in the garage, just all the stuff. That's the hardest part. And if you have more than one sibling, which means you're not an only child, and you have several siblings, there's going to be many different opinions of what to do with all that stuff. And there's thousands of things in a home, thousands. So one person might say, "Oh, it's all junk, throw it out." The other person might say, "It's worth a fortune. Let's sell it all." And another one saying, "Oh, let's just donate it all." And one person, "I don't care." Like there are all these different, but there's usually a few items in the house that people will have sentimental value about. And you don't want to start donating things, selling things, giving things away. And then all of a sudden, one of the siblings was like, "Mom promised me that, Dad promised me that," or "That's the chessboard that I played chess with Dad, and it meant a lot to me." And you just threw it in the garbage bin. So listen and communicate. And another thing to do with communication, you're going to have to set some boundaries too. That's very important, like the boundaries with communication. In the beginning, there's going to be a lot of family meetings. You're going to talk, but after you're going to get to a point where, well, it's going to be a week or two later, and as things start going on and stuff, I, I just think a good idea would be you just say, once every 2 weeks, I'm going to send out an email and I'll keep everyone updated what's going on. You got to set boundaries because you don't want those phone calls in the middle of the night saying, "This is happening, that's happening, where's this, where's that." I think email is a good way to do it. And I think every couple of weeks, that's just advice for me. So, number one, number two, communicate and listen. Number three, so when you're this is very, very important to understand because most people, unless they've been an executor and dealt with an estate, I don't think they realize the amount of time and the amount of administration that's involved with estates. I read an article yesterday and it said the average estate takes 570 hours to from the time you start it and from the time that it gets to probate and everything, and it's wound down, so everybody things get distributed, the money, all the stuff, things like that. So 570 hours and around 16 months. Okay, so that's an average. Some estates will take less. I've seen some go through in a couple of months. I just worked on an appraisal where it's been 4 years. So 4 years. So you have to be patient. And then that goes back to the communication and we communicate and let them know, listen, everybody would like their inheritance, everybody would like their some of the content, some of the stuff, but it's going to take several weeks to do, up to a year, maybe longer than a year. So you have to be patient, and patience also goes with, that can help with your empathy, that can help with all that. Just be patient with the beneficiaries, the siblings. You're gonna have to be patient with the banks and the government because they don't always work at a fast pace, not as fast as efficient as we'd like them to be. Not always, though. I've seen some done in a few months. So I don't want to put this negative spin. I just want it to be more realistic so it helps you to deal with this. And also you can give expectations to your family, which will help you deal with family. So that's number three. Number four, use professionals. If you want that estate to be a lot less than the 570 hours or even longer, if you want it to be a lot less, use professionals. What do I mean professionals? Okay, first of all, always get an appraisal. I know I'm an appraiser, but get all the stuff appraised because first of all, you're doing your due diligence. So when you fill out those forms and you have to put values of assets, you have a professional that's done it. It's not guesswork. So you don't have to worry about getting audited and all that. It's all done professionally. You're doing your due diligence, but it's going to help you deal with family Oh, an appraisal report, my God, it will just help so much because now you have a third party person saying what the things are worth because there's sentimental value, but then you'll take two objects and one person thinks it's worth 200, one thinks it's worth 2,000. Let the appraiser do that. Then you don't have to worry about that. I've talked about that in other past podcasts. Use professionals. Also, professionals, make sure you have a lawyer that, wills and estate lawyer, a good one. Make sure you have a good one, and you'll understand it'll be a good one. The one just seems to be up with the latest laws and gives you some really good direction. A good lawyer, that one that's personable. Professional downsizers, if you want to save a lot of time, a lot of that 570 hours is actually with dealing with all this stuff, all the stuff in the home and downsizing and trying to figure out what to donate, what to keep, what to recycle, and all that. If you can use a professional organizers, professional downsizers, they will save you so much time. They'll knock hours and hours and hours off. You have to pay for it, and not every estate has the funds to pay for it, but hopefully you do, or hopefully, and you don't have to get them to do all the work. You can get them to do just maybe some of the work, but at least help you out. Even a couple of days here and there, or 2 days, one day makes a big difference. I've recommended professional downsizers for people that were just like overwhelmed. And all they did was go in one day, two or three of them, and they went in and I got the people called me back and said, Dan, wow, they helped so much. That was one day. Or you can, they might manage it for 10 or 20. It depends how much stuff there is. But professional organizers, I'm a big proponent of using professional organizers. Another professional that it's more newer, but it's there is there are people now that specialize in just doing the administration of an estate. They're kind of professional executors, professional trustees. They might not be the executor, but they can assist the executor, and wow, they will save so much time because they understand the process from the beginning to the end. So professional executors, professional trustees, worth their weight in gold. Same as professional downsizers. Do not skip the appraisal. I can say that over and over. Yes, I'm a professional appraiser, professional certified appraiser, but don't skip that because most of the fighting is the stuff. When you want to talk about family and stuff, they fight over the stuff. They don't fight over the house. They don't fight over the cars, investments. That stuff's really easy to figure out. But thousands of stuff in a house is the most difficult. So get an appraiser to help you with all that. And Number five is you got to take care of yourself. If you're in the middle of this or you're going to do this, understand that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. I'd say in a high percentage of the cases, you're going to have some difficulties with family and in some of the beneficiaries. So you got to take care of yourself. And what do I mean by take care of yourself? It's just like in life. Because you're grieving. You have to understand you're grieving. So make sure you eat healthy, make sure you get your sleep. Make sure that you take really good notes of what's going on, and you have a journal what's going on with and dates and receipts and all that. That make sure that's part of the whole self-care of there. And what I really, really suggest that hopefully you have a good friend that you could just have a glass of wine with or a coffee or beer or something, and you could talk to them about this. And I don't mean like you don't want them involved because you don't want to bring them into the whole mix of it all. But I'm just talking about self-care. Like there's nothing like having a good friend and being able to say, hey, this is what's going on and stuff like that. Because a lot of it isn't, it's just you want someone that's going to listen to you. Because a lot of times when we talk and we say things out loud, you're like, maybe my brother is being kind of a jerk, but he's had a rough time of late and maybe needs the money quicker than I do or whatever. These are just hypothetical ways I'm just talking about. So again, let me just go over these real five. Number one, approach every situation with empathy. Number two, communicate and listen. Three, be patient. Four, use those professionals, including an appraiser. And five, do some self-care. I hope this helps because this is probably a talk that I'm going to do at a later date, and it's something I could talk about for hours and hours. So thank you. I hope this helps. Please share this podcast, especially if you're dealing with an estate. Share this podcast, subscribe, and thank you so much. And please take care. Have a great day. Have a great evening. Have a great week. Thank you.